Hey, I think we finally connect. God, the lag between OBS and YouTube is just horrific at times. It really, I'm gun shy now after that one week where it just wouldn't. It said, "Oh, live streaming is unavailable right now." So every time it sits there and hangs on for a minute, I'm freaking out, thinking, "Oh my God, it's not going to let me do it again this week." But hey, we're here. I've got Tony Lovasco on the line. So let me start recording. Let me start the recording, and then I'll bring him on, and we'll get this ball rolling. All right, folks.
We fought the odds and prevailed. My sword and I are one, and vengeance is my name. Go! The odds are stacked against me. A number 3 to 1. These men are seasoned warriors, unwasted like flowers. Let them come.
All right, folks, and we're back with another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report, starting you off with some good old eardrum bleeding Amon Amarth Viking metal. It doesn't get much better than that. So anyway, this week I'm super pleased and happy. I've been looking forward to this interview for a few weeks now since I last spoke to Mr. Tony, or actually I should say State Representative Tony Lovasco. Super hyped for this one. Because, again, I've heard him on Austin Peterson's show several times, and I thought maybe one day I'll get to interview him. And then, lo and behold, I went to Catherine Dreyer's campaign event, and there was Mr. Lovasco, and I didn't even recognize him. That's how stupid I am sometimes. But anyway, so this evening we're going to talk about, we're going to get into the special session a little bit about what the governor's agenda is, so everybody out there in KEYK land or around the Owensville area, wherever you're listening, will have a good understanding of what the agenda is, what else maybe we can try to get done, and then we want to get into Tony's fight against civil asset forfeiture and any other topic we can think of. So, Tony, how are you doing this evening, sir?
I'm doing well, John. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so happy to have you with me. So I guess to start out, just so everybody knows who you are, just give us a little background on yourself and the district or area you represent, and we'll go from there.
Well, sure. So I've been in the legislature just basically 4 years now. I'm going into my third term in January. I represent House District 64, which is out in St. Charles County. The current district actually represents part of Lincoln County. That's actually why I was at Catherine's event. She was out in my district there. But after redistricting in the first of the year, I'll represent basically the northern O'Fallon area in St. Charles County over to the western edge of the district and the county over in Forestell. So I've got some little mix between kind of a suburban and a rural district, kind of all in one. But we're very small government-minded folk out in St. Charles County, so I think I'm a pretty good fit for the area.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I'll have to be honest, Tony. That shocks me when you get into areas like, the closer to St. Louis you get, you would think that there would be more big government folks. But yes, I've heard a lot of people talk about the St. Charles County area and how they're small government minded, because last year when I interviewed Senator Eigel and he was discussing, trying to push a bill to get rid of personal property tax, I guess the Senate said, well, why don't you just do that in St. Charles County then? And, he's like, fine, maybe we will. So I guess to start off with, Tony, let's discuss the special session, and if you would, just kind of lay out, because I've laid it out in general terms, but you have a little more knowledge on this than I do. So the governor called for a special session for agricultural tax cuts and a cut to the income tax, like 0.5%. Am I missing anything here on the special session on his agenda?
Well, just a little bit. So I would make the differentiation. He wasn't calling for a tax cut on agriculture. He was calling for agricultural tax credit.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
The distinction there being that he's basically wanting a subsidy for agriculture, and specifically certain types of folks engaged in agriculture. It's not necessarily what you might imagine as just, the average family farm that can qualify for these things. And granted, there's a good amount of revenue that comes into Missouri from agriculture. I don't dispute that. I have no beef with farmers, no pun intended. However, the reality is anytime you've got the government kind of picking winners and losers when they decide, today we're going to subsidize this group or today we're going to penalize that group. Not only do you have vast inequities in the actual market forces that ultimately will adjust for these things, via prices and whatnot. But on top of that, you've got a situation in which, people are fundamentally not being treated fairly. He's kind of using this concept of a income tax cut across the board as a little bit of a hook to get some of us more conservative folks on board with the idea of voting for these agricultural subsidies. That was kind of the starting point of the conversation, was that he was intending to kind of put this together in one big old bill. We were going to have to vote it up or down all at once, and that was just going to be the end of it. And then last week happened. And let me tell you, last week kind of threw a wrench into things in his plan, which I'm kind of all right with because I wasn't super on board with his plan. While I do support the idea of getting an income tax cut across the board, the cuts that he was talking about making were coming anyway. There were tax cuts that were already on the books. They were basically going to be phased in over the course of about 5 to 7 years based on automatic triggers that happen if the Missouri economy hits certain benchmarks. And so while I'm certainly very much on board with the idea of not having to wait 7 years for the tax cut and getting them, in a month or so, I don't necessarily think that is in and of itself worth, voting for all those agriculture subsidies. And so it turns out I'm not the only one who felt that way. There was quite a few folks in the General Assembly who, for starters, would prefer to just vote on the two measures separately, not as one big bill. And then furthermore, would like us to go quite a bit farther on the tax cut side in a way that, would actually have some meat to it, not just be something that's going to happen anyway. And so that's kind of where the discussion's been at. On Wednesday, we convened and we were there for less than an hour. It was basically decided that we were going to punt until next week to kind of give our House leadership some time to negotiate with the folks behind the scene in the Senate. And now they're kind of talking. The rumors are, kind of back and forth as to whether or not we're going to, get something really great next week or if it's going to end up being a bunch of nothing. To be honest with you, if I was going to bet, I would bet on a bunch of nothing. I'm not super optimistic, but, we're doing what we can to kind of convince the people that we need to convince that people in Missouri need some relief.
Yeah. Now, of course, I saw you for a brief moment on Wednesday. We, Patrick's group, and I think there was 11 of us up there on Wednesday to, walk the floors of the House and Senate to say, hey, we'd sure like to see the elimination of sales tax on food. And honestly, a lot of them were on board. Almost everyone we talked to said, yeah, this is that, and I can't remember the name of the gentleman that Patrick was talking to, and he's like, well, it's always good to have the numbers. What amount are we talking as far as how much money in revenue will be leaving with the elimination of the sales tax? So Patrick and his gentleman were talking back and forth, and I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just look it up real quick. So I looked it up and found it. Now, this, of course, was last year. What was it? I can't remember if is it Mary Elizabeth Coleman's bill, I believe. That's her name. So they had figures,
Yep.
and it went anywhere from, let's see, what was the top number was like $142 million was going to be revenue that wouldn't come in. And the guy's like, well, that's perfectly fine. $140 million compared to what, $48 billion budget that we have.
Right.
$142 million is a drop in the bucket. So, after seeing the numbers, he's like, well, there's something we could propose because, of course, they're going to want the figures. Well, how much money is the state going to be losing onto this? There was only, I'm not going to say his name, but there was only one person, I believe, on the Senate side, and his his LA even said, we don't even want to hear about it. We don't even want to know. We don't want any phone calls. We don't want anything. I'm like, wow, really? Like, what is your hang up? Pretty much, his office was pretty much saying, we're just going to do whatever the governor wants, and that's pretty much it. And I thought, wow, that's kind of, I don't know. I was just blown away by the attitude. Like, I don't know. It was just odd to me, because sometimes you'll get a disagreement, but you still have a little bit of a discussion, and there wasn't even a discussion. It was like, don't want to hear it, don't care, no. Like, okay, that's fine. And then also, because you brought this up before, it was right before September the 6th, I saw that Ron Hicks reintroduced his House Bill 2704 with some additional language. And I don't have the, verbatim what he wrote, but basically something was added to the front that said, in light of Amendment 3 and the dangers of it, he reintroduced his bill. Now, I know that it's a long shot, but I mean, let's get into this. Let's get into this Amendment 3 and the differences between Ron Hicks's bill and what Amendment 3 is all about. Because I know you asked the correct me if I'm wrong, but you asked the governor to expand a special session for Ron Hicks's bill. Is that correct?
I did, yeah. Unfortunately, he said no.
Right.
Not in so many words, of course, and not to me directly, but I read in the paper that he said no. A bunch of us have been thinking this for a while. Even before special session, we were pushing Ron Hicks's bill last year, because the reality is, wherever you feel about the recreational marijuana issue, I think everyone can pretty well agree it does not belong in the Constitution to implement a 30-something page policy book that gets down in the nitty gritty of how licenses are administered and creating new positions that oversee equity. And this Amendment 3 is just filled with a lot of nonsense, quite frankly, that it's intended to placate a handful of special interests. And the reality is, even those who are just diehard opposed to the concept of recreational marijuana, and to be clear, I'm not one of those folks. I do support the concept. But even the folks that are just not willing to talk about it normally in the legislature, all of a sudden this year, their ears perked up when we started talking about, hey, if we can do this the right way through the General Assembly, through the legislature, in statute, you'll have a hand in this. You'll be part of the discussion. And at the end of the day, if we get something wrong, we can come back next year and we could, tweak it. Whereas, once Amendment 3 gets into the Constitution, that's a whole different ballgame, and it's a whole lot harder and a whole lot more expensive to make, changes and repairs. And so I was very much hoping that the governor would understand that and would expand the special session to address the issue. He's thus far not been willing to do so. The reality is, there's nothing actually keeping us from doing it anyway. The legislature could actually pass Ron's bill if leadership would allow us to bring it to the floor. And we could send it to the governor's desk. And, after he sees, hey, it's passed, like, here's the final product, he could decide to expand the special session then, and then just sign it. Right. There is a mechanism for that. Now, we do have a short time period. I think it's 60 days total constitutionally that we'd have to get in and get out since he called the special session. So the clock is ticking. And the reality is, I don't think leadership in either the House or the Senate is particularly interested in fighting that fight. But it is possible. And so, a bunch of us are still kind of prodding as we can to suggest that, maybe the game's not over just yet.
And I was happy to hear it because, again, even though it is a long shot, having Amendment 3 going to, be hitting the ballot in November, it's a good time to bring it back up, bring the topic back up, discuss it, discuss the differences between, doing it legislatively and then amending the Constitution. I was happy to see it. Now, I have a question from a live stream viewer here, Tony, and he wants to know, why does Missouri take in so much federal money?
because we have a General Assembly that refuses to say no. As a short version. I mean, the federal government hands out money like candy on a regular basis. And I mean, these last 2 years since COVID, like it's been ramped up to the point of insanity. We have the largest budget in Missouri history that just got passed. And of course, I didn't vote for it. But, as you said, it's right around that $48 billion mark, up from, I think it was like $34 billion, something like that, the year prior. And of that, like 2/3 of that increase is federal money that the legislature just couldn't say no to. And of course, we all know that more often than not, when we get money from the federal government, not only does it come with strings attached as to how you can spend it, but it also makes us that much more dependent on, the federal government, who very clearly does not have our best interest at heart. I can't count the number of issues that we've run into trying to fix a particular problem or reform something, only to find out that, oh, well, if we did that, it would violate X rule from such and such department of the federal government, and we'd lose a bunch of money, and then all of a sudden your votes would dry up. You mentioned Senator Eigel before. He had a plan a couple of years ago to get St. Charles County and the surrounding counties opted out of the federal emissions program to have your vehicles mandatory emissions inspections to get your tags renewed. And of course, most of the state does not have to fall into that, but because of the Clean Air Act or whatever, our region is identified by the EPA as a higher pollutant area or something, and as a result, our people are all mandated to get this completely waste of time emissions test every 2 years when we get our plates renewed. That basically just amounts to paying another fee, and they don't even do an actual test anymore. They like plug a thing into your car's computer, and your computer tells it if it passes or not. It's ridiculous. Anyway, he had the concept of hey, we're gonna withdraw from that program, and everyone's head started exploding because if we do that, we might lose $56 million in federal highway funds. That of course has nothing to do with vehicle emissions directly. It was just that was the string that the federal government put on the hook to get us to buy into that program years ago. And sure enough, his votes dried up, and we still have emissions testing in St. Charles County. So, it's a nightmare, and we absolutely need to start saying no to all these handouts from the Fed.
Yeah, you talk about. I'm fortunate to live in an area that, I'm in Gasconade County. There's no emission testing. Now, if you go one county east to Franklin County, I think they still have emissions testing. But where I'm at, nope. You just go get your car inspected and then go get your tags renewed, and you're on your merry way. And somebody else asked, why do we keep giving the federal government Missouri money?
Well, that's a little harder in the sense that they frequently just take it. A good chunk of the money that we get to give the feds is, of course, through taxes that are assessed directly to whether it be businesses or individuals that are paying taxes directly to the federal government. Obviously there's cooperative agreements and the like with individual programs where we exchange money back and forth both directions with the feds through things like the Medicaid program, things like that. That gets complicated quickly. But again, it all comes back to why are we continuing to tie our economic activity to the federal government's whims? Why do we participate in Medicaid at all, to be honest? If we wanted to come up with a program in Missouri, 100% administered by the state of Missouri to deal with the kinds of folks that need help that are on that federal program, I am quite convinced that we could do it considerably cheaper and more efficiently by keeping the federal government completely out. And yet we don't. And now it's, a quarter of the state budget every year. So, it's a lesson we continue to keep learning the hard way.
It's a quarter of the state budget?
Yeah.
Holy crap. I had no idea it was that the bill was that dang high. And, okay. This is what gets me. It's just like education. The amount of money we spend on education in this state. And every time you turn around, schools are like, we need more money. It's like, where the heck did all of it go to begin with? Where are these schools spending? I don't remember the last total. I looked up the budget, and I cannot remember the amount for this, this budget year, what the schools got. But I saw the number, and I was like, holy crap. And the schools are still saying, well, that's just not enough. Is there any are there any movements in the legislature? I'm sure there are, of getting of turning it in a new direction on this whole educational debacle that we have because of not only federal funding but all the issues that come with the funny federal money. What kind of options do we have, or have you seen some legislation where somebody's saying, "Hey, we can do better than the system that we currently have in place"? I mean, what are we looking at here as far as legislature or legislators crafting legislation to try to remedy the situation?
I mean, to be honest, it's a really long game. We've got several reps and senators who are working hard on, kind of education reform concepts, whether it be, open enrollment or more school choice, expansion of charter schools, that kind of thing, which kind of chip away at, the power that the public school system has and provide, some parents at least some options when it comes to, getting their kids educated in a way that's best for them. The reality is, though, it's hard to make even modest changes in anything to do with education. I know Phil Cristofanelli, representative out of St. Charles as well. He had a bill the year before last that basically it was they call it the ESA bill, the Education Scholarship Accounts, and it was a kind of a tax credit program where people could kind of donate money to these charities, and in exchange they would get a tax write-off, and then the charities would administer these funds that the money would go into. That would, be used to give scholarships to underadvantaged kids that meet certain requirements according to the bill. And, his initial bill was pretty expansive. It was, giving a lot of folks a really good opportunity if their kid's school was failing to, have an option of getting these scholarships to send their kid somewhere else. And, it got pared back so much that the bill that ultimately got passed, the vast majority of kids, across the state of Missouri just aren't eligible, between the income requirements and quite a few counties, were flat out just not included. Like, you just can't participate if you live there because, the rep in that area didn't want it in their town because their superintendent lobbied them or whatever. And, it got to the point where it was, it was better than doing nothing, of course, and I certainly supported it. But it was really disappointing that we had something that really could have made a big difference and ended up being, kind of watered down. And it passed by exactly one vote. I mean, it barely made it through. If one guy called in sick, we would not have gotten that bill passed. That's how close that margin was. And so, anytime we talk about making, widespread changes or major reforms, I mean, we just have so much work to do when it comes to electing people that really want to see the public school system change. It's always frustrated me that, we as Republicans tend to talk a lot about, things like how we're against Obamacare and socialized medicine and that sort of thing. And yet there are so many people who, run under the Republican brand that have absolutely no problem whatsoever with socialized education. And there really isn't any movement whatsoever among a lot of people in the party to make major changes, because the reality is they do support the public school system as it is. They maybe want to make some tweaks here and there. But the reality is, if we're really going to give people, education freedom, we're going to let people actually make their own decisions. And certainly if we're going to untie people from this massive tax burden that supports this monstrosity of the public school system, we have to start paring away at the socialized concept behind the entire underpinning of the public school system. And, that's a slow process, and it's something that, I'll be honest, I probably won't ever live to see myself. But we got to do it here a little bit as we can, because it's just getting out of control.
Yeah, and that's the thing I hear, like, people in the liberty movement, especially just libertarians, some of them say, well, let's do school choice and do some things like this. And then the other side's like, well, just get rid of the Department of Education completely. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. And I'm kind of in the camp with the folks that say, that's never going to happen. So let's do it slowly. Let's chip away, like you said, chip away at it and get it to the point where it actually works as it was originally intended, which is to educate your kids without a bunch of other crap being shoved down their throat and, costing just stupid amounts of money and adding another tax burden on top of everybody. But yeah, there seems to be two camps. Let's just chop it off, and it's like, yeah, well, realistically, when you're challenging the federal government and education. You're not just going to cut it off and be like, ta-da, nailed it. No, you're going to have to slowly drag everybody away. And in because of that subject, Tony, which I know you're going to support this because I've heard you talk enough on it. When we're talking about personal property taxes and the elimination of personal property tax, do you see us ever getting that done here in the state?
I do. I'm not sure how. There's a lot of different competing plans. I'm working on a couple myself for next year. There's a lot of different ways of fixing that issue. The tough part becomes, no matter how you adjust things around, you're stepping on someone's toes. You'd think that the school districts were the biggest opponents of eliminating the personal property tax because they get the most amount of money of anybody. But believe it or not, while they were not for it, I mean, they definitely opposed making major changes. They weren't nearly as vocal about it as most of the municipalities and special taxing districts, the ambulance districts and the libraries and that sort of thing, because, they get almost all of their funding from property tax. Now, of course, they get more from real estate tax than they do personal property. It's a smaller piece of the pie, but it's that same formula. And the tough part becomes, the debate invariably always, comes up of, oh, well, how are you going to replace that revenue if you get rid of that? And, I get that you can't necessarily pull the rug out from everybody all at once. And there are some, services that people appreciate that are, getting paid for by this tax. But the reality is nobody's really talking about well, how can we maybe cut some expenses so that you don't have to replace as much revenue? It should be a give or take, right? If you're going to eliminate one tax, maybe you do have to bump up something else or make some adjustments here and there so that, some of these departments can still get some money. But, I don't think it's necessarily unreasonable to ask them to come to the table and say, hey, maybe you can use this as an opportunity to cut some waste and trim some fat a little bit. And especially when we've got a situation where people's assessments are skyrocketing and their taxes are going through the roof and you got inflation and everything else going on. The average person in Missouri is not getting an automatic increase every year to cover those expenses. And yet, for whatever reason, these taxing jurisdictions all expect that they should. That, when revenues come up, increase because, of inflation and these assessments go up, they should just get a windfall. And, it's just completely criminal to take that away from them. And that's just not reasonable. And so there's got to be a give or take there. I'm not sure what the magic formula is to actually get people to come on board because the reality is they fought pretty hard against it last year when we tried. But we're going to keep going. And, the reality is, personal property tax is probably the least popular tax that we've got in Missouri. So there is a lot of will on both sides of the aisle to do something about it. It's just no one can quite agree on what approach to take.
Yeah, because I know, when I interviewed Senator Eigel last year, he had stated that, or maybe it was the beginning of this year, I can't remember. It was one of these 2 years. He had stated that his bill was eliminated at the rate of inflation. So, when inflation's lower, then it takes a few years. But right now, it could be done in 2 years and it would be gone. And instead of just chopping it off at, when inflation rate's lower, it gives these municipalities time to adjust, figure out where that money's going to come from. And, something else I was unaware of, he said that my county might get 15% of all that money. The rest goes to the state. And so I'm like, yeah, I understand it's especially for a smaller county, it's probably a decent chunk of change, but I don't know. Do we want to keep insulting people by sending them a tax bill? Everybody goes out for the most part, buys Christmas presents, all these things, and then right after that, what do you get in the mail? You get a personal property tax bill. Hey, besides, we know you just spent a whole lot of money on Christmas and everything, but by the way, you owe us a rental fee for your cars, your livestock, your farm equipment, everything under the sun. Now you've got to pay us a rental fee. And here's your punishment for going out and buying equipment or livestock or whatever. It just, the more I think about it, the more it irritates me. Because I don't know of anybody. I don't think I've ever met a person that was happy to get a personal property tax bill in the mail because they know it's coming, but nobody goes, oh, I can't wait to get that bill in the mail and pay, send a check to the county. But yet, yeah, when you're trying to eliminate it, they suddenly they change their mind. Like, well, wait a minute now. It's like you can't have it both ways. Yes, you may see an increase in your local sales tax to make up the funding for the libraries or the ambulance district or the schools or whatever. So in essence, you're not saving any money, but you're sure not paying it out in one chunk because, like Patrick said, Patrick's got a house and 5 acres. And between $3,000, which it just seems completely stupid to me. It's like $3,000 for a house and 5 acres? Like, so yeah, depending on the county you live in, and you're talking about assessments earlier. I don't know about my area, but I've been hearing, I know Franklin County's got to be awful because their assessors drive around all the time. It's like if you paint your house, you can just plan on your tax bill going up. They do. They just drive around. When I did pest control work years ago, I was somewhere on the other side of Union, Missouri, I think. And this gal, she was, I said something about property tax or something, and she went off on a tirade, and she's like, these stupid blankety blank assessors, she's like, they're driving up and down the road all the time. She goes, I am not making that up. I am not exaggerating. They're driving, and she said, every time I turn around, my assessment's going up, and she said, I haven't even done anything. I haven't put up a new fence. I haven't put a new roof on. I haven't added onto the house. Nothing. She said, but every time I turn around, there's the assessors coming out, and they're adding to my tax bill. And you would think, again, you're talking about windfalls with these municipalities and stuff. Where do these people are heartless. They know, they see it themselves. They all go to the grocery store. They see it at the gas pump. You would think that something inside of them would say, hey, maybe we should ease up a little bit, but they don't. So
I would actually say it's probably worse than that in a lot of respects, because when you think about it, it's bad enough that they're charging you rent on your car. But when you think about, if you don't pay your real estate taxes, like, they take your house, right? They foreclose on your mortgage, and they'll take it from you. And not only is that just insane on a tyrannical level, just philosophically, but the idea that, the people that are typically in a position to own a home tend to be people that are a little bit more responsible. They've saved a little bit. Like, you're not only punishing people for having success and in making it more and more likely that people are going to not do that sort of thing down the line if they don't think they can afford, just to pay the upkeep even after you've paid the note off. But it's amazing how little interest there is in reforming that aspect of things. I had a bill last year that literally all the bill did was say that if it's a single family residence, that's your primary residence, so you don't rent it out or have a business, it's just, your home, they can't foreclose in order to recoup unpaid real estate tax. They have to, send it to collections or put a lien on the house and collect once you sell down the line or whatever. There's a whole laundry list of things they could do. But they can't literally take your property and sell it out from under you if it's your home. I couldn't even get the bill to committee. Didn't get a referral. Didn't go anywhere. To me, it's amazing that there isn't more of an outcry, because you look at the folks that tend to lose their houses in the tax sales. It tends to be people that, are scraping by. A lot of people are on fixed incomes. A lot of people are retired. Maybe they thought that, they had enough savings, and then, neighborhood popped up next door, and all of a sudden their property value skyrocketed, and through no fault of their own, now their expenses every year go up, even though they don't have a mortgage. And if they get behind, and then they're on the street. And it's insane that we allow the government to do that.
Yeah, and again, and inflation being the way it is right now, I can't imagine, especially people on fixed incomes, retirees, or whatever. I can't imagine what these people are going through right now. And then again, the audacity of bureaucrats to say, oh, man, we got an opportunity here to make more money. We can assess a higher valuation on the houses and get more money, even though because of the price increase on everything, they're getting a windfall in taxes. I mean, all these municipalities are seeing tax revenues like they haven't seen in a long time, and yet they still want to, not only are they gaining, funds from that, But every time you turn around, yeah, they're raising your property taxes, your real estate value, and it just never seems like they can get enough money. And then also, it seems as if they trip all over themselves to turn around and spend it. Now, the town that I live in, I've heard that we had about it was about $5 million surplus. Now, from what I understood, the state's like, hey, you can't keep hoarding all that money. You got to do something with it. And we've got a lot of streets around here that could use some repaving and some sidewalks that are kind of in disrepair. And they decided, well, maybe we'll redo all the sidewalks down Main Street. That was going to be, I don't know, $1.5 million. Oh, well, they built a new police station. I believe that was 1.6 million. And literally a few years ago, they could have bought the old, it's the school administration building for $250,000, and they turned that down. But now they spent $1.5 million on a new police station. It just blows my mind.
I hate to say it. I'm jealous of your $1.2 million police station because they spent a lot more than that where I'm at.
I bet they did.
So,
I bet they did.
Yeah, it's nuts. And you know, whether you're talking about, you know, these prevailing wage rules that require them to pay well above market rate in a lot of cases to have things constructed, you know, to just the insanity of the constant, well, you know, this building's 20 years old. We need a new one now. You know, as if most of the businesses that you patronize are somehow magically newer than that. And no, the vast majority is most buildings are older. You know, you get to a point where, yeah, you have to, you know, maybe knock it down and start over, but that certainly shouldn't be the first thing that you go to. And yet, you know, I can't get through a whole year, I don't think, without some political subdivision in the county, you know, proposing some tax increase on the ballot come April to cover some new project, new capital expenditure that they decide that, you know, somebody needs a new building or somebody needs a new rehab, and it never stops. And very frequently it's stuff that, like you said, not only were there cheaper ways that they could have gone, but in a lot of cases you just don't need to do it at all. You know, building rec centers and public swimming pools and things that have nothing to do with the purpose of government whatsoever. You know, at least with the police station, that's okay. You need police. That's a function of government. That makes sense. But you know, what do you need a Taj Mahal as a police station? Probably not. But you know, it at least needs to exist. But you know, a sizable amount of the stuff that they end up spending money on, you know, shouldn't be, you know, something government's doing at all. And yet, you know, people don't blink an eye. They still vote for it. So I don't know.
Yeah, don't get me started on. Oh man. Okay, so here about 9 years ago, we lived outside of city limits, and there had been a slight increase in real estate tax, and it finally, you know, whatever. It was done. It went back to the normal rate, and I told my wife, I said, okay, we'll move into town. So we started looking. We bought the house we're in now, and it wasn't even 2 or 3 months later, we ordered pizza from Domino's, and there's something stuck to the top of the box. Vote yes for a new water park. And I'm thinking, are you? I blew up. I told my wife, I said, we just freaking got here. And now they want to add. And the only option the city gave them was, well, it has to go on the personal property tax. So then we got into this whole thing, Tony, where they said, well, it's only going to cost everybody $30-something a year extra to pay for this water park. Now, the couple that I used to work for, she called the courthouse, and she said, how many personal property tax bills do you send out in Owensville? Now, she took the total over however many years it was going to take to pay it off and, you know, divided the amount of bills that went in, and she found it was going to be about $100-something more per year. So she's going to meetings, and she's talking about all these things. And the guy doing the meeting who was on the park board kind of like, oh, well, you know, he just kind of poo-pooed the whole thing. Now, after the meeting, he's like, yeah, you're right. You're right on this. You're right on that. During the meeting, he wouldn't admit to it. After the meeting, he admitted to it. Now, as far as I know, that water park has not been breaking even for several years now that it's been here. It's not even breaking even. It's losing money every year. But they had to have it. And the one message that I tried to get across to people that made them very angry is I said, hey, it's not the government's job to entertain your kids. That's your job. And they get really upset when you say that, but it's true. You know, and the best one, so there was a Facebook page dedicated to this thing, and they said this page is for an open dialect and debate on the water park. So I was putting up my reasons, you know, I'd get in the comments and type my reasons being against it. And a woman asked me, she said, so if you vote no on this, are you going to take your kids there? And I typed, my response was no, why would I participate in my own theft? And then 2 or 3 days before the vote, anybody who had a negative comment on the water park, which there was only like 3 of us, they wiped all of our comments off the page and just kicked us from the page. And one of the guys like, yeah, it's a nice open dialect you got going on there. Okay. So speaking of property, let's just roll into this next thing, because you've been fighting really hard. Actually, before we go into that, Catherine Dreyer has a question. Excuse me. Is there a bill that will ban things like red light cameras, speed monitoring cameras statewide?
Why, yes, Catherine, there is. And I happen to be the one who filed that bill. So I don't remember the bill number now. It was last session. But, yes, I had a bill that would prohibit basically any kind of automated traffic enforcement. And so that would, prohibit red light cameras, speed cameras, any new technology not yet quite conceived. Basically, as long as it used some kind of, camera or similar sensor to record your license plate, and then, assess some kind of traffic violation as a result, you can't do it anymore. That was the plan. I did actually get it out of committee, and we actually added it to a bill on the floor of the House. Unfortunately, that bill ultimately didn't make it to the Senate. However, and it did pass the House, as far as my language goes. So I'm certainly going to try again next year. The reality is we're in a really good spot right now because almost nobody's using the thing. And so we got a really small window where there's not really much of anybody fighting it because nobody's doing it. I think I don't remember the name of the town off the top of my head. There's one town that's got like 3 of them left in the whole state. The Supreme Court had previously ruled that most of the previous kinds of red light cameras were unconstitutional. However, they left some loopholes that would allow municipalities, if they so chose, to do certain things that would keep them in compliance with the court ruling. And this one town actually decided that they were going to go ahead and do it. And I think it was Hannibal. Now I think about that. I'm pretty sure it was Hannibal. And so, my thought was, hey, before anybody else gets any bright ideas to bring these things back, or before some enterprising company decides to go, door to door selling their new, fancy speed cameras or whatever the next big thing they're going to push is, I think we should get on the books that we just aren't going to do that here in Missouri. So I'm certainly going to keep trying to do that next year for
sure. That's good. Yeah, I have a story on that. Company I worked for years ago, in Washington, they had installed them, and he didn't even run a red light. He just didn't stop on the yellow, and he went on through, and it, took a picture of his license plate, and they sent him a ticket in the mail. So he goes, and this guy kind of having an engineering background, he does the math on when you see the yellow light. If you're going at that speed at that light in that section and you apply your brakes, it's going to take you this many feet to stop. So you're going to end up going through it no matter what. And so he does all the math, types it all out, goes to his court date. They call his name, and he's like, hey, Your Honor, I'd like to, present this. The judge looks at it, reads it, takes his ticket, tears it up, and goes, go home. And he goes, all I had to do was show him the math, and they're like, all right, get out of here. And then the next thing you know, they were gone. So that was nice. Okay. The next subject I did want to get into with you, Tony, is getting rid of civil asset forfeiture. Now, let's start off by this. what are the current laws on civil asset forfeiture here in Missouri?
So if you go look at state statute and strictly by Missouri state law, it's actually pretty good. The concept of civil asset forfeiture for practical purposes doesn't really exist in Missouri. It does on paper, but effectively it can only be used as a secondary process after someone's been convicted of a crime of some kind. And so you'd have a second hearing, a second trial, effectively against your property, which is how these proceedings work, right? They don't charge you with a crime. They file a civil action against your stuff and accuse the stuff of having participated in a crime in some capacity. But in Missouri, they have to do that after they've convicted you of an underlying crime of some kind. And then if they are to prevail on the civil action against your property, any of the proceeds that comes from that goes to the public school system. It doesn't go to law enforcement or the prosecutors or any of the people that were involved in that proceeding. And so the idea is that, there's not necessarily going to be any kind of profit incentive to go after people unnecessarily. Plus, you have a conviction, which was, achieved beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal trial before they can do that. And so all things considered, I'd say that's pretty fair. Unfortunately, our good friends of the federal government decided they were going to create a program called the Equitable Sharing Program. And it's basically a process where the federal government basically bribes local law enforcement and prosecutors to turn over cases to federal jurisdiction where these protections do not apply, and then go through the civil proceeding in the federal courts. And then basically they'll get a kickback to the local prosecutors and law enforcement organizations that turned over the case. I think they give them about 80%. The feds keep about 20%, if I remember my math right. And so that completely sidesteps Missouri's very robust laws. And so I've been working for the last several years to put an end to that. In my mind, ideally, I'm inclined to think we shouldn't turn property over to federal jurisdiction at all. We should just, if there's a state crime that was committed, prosecute the state crime, and then after you get a conviction, then you can do the process for forfeiture if it's appropriate. But the idea that we're going to hand things over to the feds to go after someone's property without ever convicting them of a crime, or in most cases not even charging them with a crime, just basically on the hunch that they were somehow involved in some kind of criminal activity, that's insane. And I've come a lot closer than others in the past at getting this done. We did have to negotiate a little bit. We had a version of it that was a little bit of a compromise that would still allow them to transfer, very large amounts of currency. So I think it was like $100,000 or more in one revision of the bill. I think it went down to like $75,000 in a different one. Because there was some pushback about, what about the drug cartels and the drug money and all that? And, of course, I'm inclined to think that the reality is that suspected drug dealers, they have rights also. I don't think that we should be violating their constitutional rights any more than anybody else. But, we decided we were going to play ball a little bit. We were going to try to compromise. And at the end of the day, the interest behind keeping the status quo intact, they killed that bill too. So we're going to start over again next year. And to be honest, I'm not inclined to compromise this next time. We tried playing ball. We tried, being the reasonable people in the room. And, they decided to kind of stab us in the back anyway. So I think we're going to go for the whole apple. And, if it takes us in a few more years, we're going to keep doing until we get it. Because this is just an insane program that just needs to stop.
Yeah, I remember the equitable sharing program, and I thought, well, the Fed. When I first saw it, when I first read it, I saw it, and I thought before I read it, I was like, we probably get maybe 50%. And when I saw 80%, I'm like, wow, they are really, really, really wanting. The feds really, really want the states to continue to help them, or the feds really want the states' continued cooperation. And, but I know there's several states that have reformed their civil asset forfeiture because of the fact that people were losing their property before they were even convicted. I know especially during the, I believe during the 80s and the crack cocaine explosion, civil asset forfeiture, these police departments and everything were bringing in a lot of dough. Because of the big busts, especially L.A., Miami, New York, some of those big metropolitan areas. Okay. I'm trying to think of another subject here because people in the live chat are bringing up the flock cameras, which I guess if they take your yeah. So I mean, your bill would include anything like that as well, right? A flock camera, all that stuff would be included in on a bill like that.
Yes and no.
Okay.
So my bill, it covers the technology. The little bit of a problem we still have to address, and I still haven't figured out exactly what the best solution is. My bill only covers government actors, right? Whether it be a local municipality or police department or highway patrol, something like that. We're starting to see, subdivisions putting in, some of these systems and tracking people's, whereabouts and whatnot. And to me, that's really scary. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder to, make any kind of inroads into that, with government action because, you don't want to violate people's private property rights and, subdivisions have property rights. You also have to deal with the logistics of what you can and can't control and what do you try to tax it or do you get some fees associated, inspections. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can get cute trying to discourage it. But the reality is you got to be real careful when you start using the hammer of government to go after people for doing stuff you don't like that, isn't technically harmful. It's just really bad for society, right? So I don't have a good fix for that at this point. It's something I'm looking at. But I am really not happy with the fact that we're getting more and more private groups that are deciding that, they want to start spying on everybody too.
Yeah, I'm not, that creeps me out really badly to think about, someone tracking you from one intersection to another, multiple intersections away. I don't like that. And Catherine says her town just had a meeting about putting one up on a public street. So yeah.
Yeah. Now my bill would prohibit most of that. Although again, one of the things that was sticky was law enforcement was very adamant that they would play ball. They would not kill my bill, which to their credit they didn't, surprisingly. But the one thing that they would absolutely not negotiate on is they wanted to maintain their license plate readers, their automated readers. Because they maintain that, they're not used for traffic enforcement and my bill would prohibit them from being used for that, but they wanted to be able to use them to rescue kidnap victims and things like that. And that, without that, they wouldn't be able to track people, fugitives movement. I got to tell you, I'm not real comfortable with that either. It's going to be a hell of a lot harder to get the votes, I think, to do anything about that one, just because obviously, we don't want to let criminals go. At the same time, we do not want to turn into China or one of these other places that, government is constantly watching you no matter where you go, just because, maybe one day a bad guy might walk past that street. I'm not a fan of that at all.
Yeah, neither am I. Okay, so real quick here before I got a clip. I have a question. Do you know the rough percentage of folks in a General Assembly that work with law enforcement or their agencies to write bills here in the state? And the reason he asks is Jared Taylor's self-defense bill. Law enforcement agencies said they would work with him to rewrite the bill.
Well, Jared Taylor's termed out, so he's not coming back next year, although it's almost a guarantee that bill's coming back. I thought I heard some rumors that they might have somebody picking it up. I know I kind of looked into maybe filing it myself. I think I may have to go a different direction myself this year. Someone's going to file it almost certainly. I will say this. It's always good when you've got a group like law enforcement that, is against the bill to come to the table, hear them out, see what their objections are. A lot of times you can come to an understanding where you can get 95% of what you want and not compromise away what your bill does. But a lot of times, some of these groups come to you and, they want to talk. And in reality, they're trying to, slow you down. They're trying to run the clock out before it's too late to get it to, over to the Senate, or they're maybe trying to figure out what angle they need to do to kill it behind the scenes. And I'm not calling law enforcement out specifically. It's really any interest group that has an objection to a bill. That's just a very common tactic. And so, you do have to be careful. I'm always of the mind that, anytime you can have a conversation and find out why someone objects to the bill, that's a good thing. Does it mean that I'm going to let them rewrite it to their liking? No. They're welcome to make suggestions. If you want to give me some text, I will take submissions from anyone. Anyone has an idea of something I should do, I'll listen. But ultimately, any revisions that are going to be made, they're going to come from me because I want to make sure that they're still going to do what I want and that there isn't going to be anything in there that's, poison pill or whatnot.
Okay, yeah, because I know with SEPA there were some police chiefs and sheriff's departments and prosecuting attorneys that were very unhappy about it, and it's like I don't understand. I don't understand. Okay, you're letting people, you're keeping the feds from pushing their unconstitutional gun laws on to the citizens of the state of Missouri, and some of them were unhappy about it. And it's like nobody said you couldn't prosecute a murder. No one said if somebody had perpetrated a violent crime that you can't keep them from owning firearms. None of that's in there, but that's the way they acted. They acted like they just couldn't do anything anymore. And my opinion is that, okay, well, you're just mad because you can't play footsie with the ATF and the FBI and get some more of that federal money, so you're upset. And, I'm glad you're upset. I'm glad you can't just call the ATF and FBI in anytime you want their help to enforce unconstitutional gun laws. So, all right. So, to those of you in the KEYK audience, thanks again for joining me this week for the Missouri Liberty Report. Make sure you tune in next week. I'm going to have Daniel Miller from the Texas Nationalist Movement on with me to discuss how things are going in the case of a national divorce. So make sure you're here next week for that. All right. I know you got a few minutes left, Tony. So let me ask you a question because this Daniel Miller guy that I'm going to have on next week. Let me get your opinion. And I'm not trying to hold your feet to the fire or anything. Well, actually, before I go into that, people are wanting to know if you're aware of anybody wanting to make changes to SEPA and try to soften it a little bit. Because I know there's been talk of that. Is there still talk about that?
I hear rumblings. We ought to do something about that thing. Why my sheriffs aren't liking it? Blah blah blah. That kind of scuttlebutt. I've not heard of any concerted effort or any particular person spearheading that effort, which I think is good. However, we need to be vigilant. I feel like that's the kind of thing that will get slipped into some unrelated bill elsewhere. Especially now that Jared Taylor's leaving, he's going to be incumbent upon a lot of us other aficionados to make sure that we keep track of any legislation that has anything to do with weapons because, people can be pretty clever about how they slip things into bills. And so I'm sure there will be some effort to weaken it in some way we haven't thought of yet. So we'll have to pay attention. But I have not luckily heard of any specific person working on it. So we'll see.
Okay, and another question is, somebody wants to know, what do you think about trying to abolish things like teachers' unions and police unions and things of that nature? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that could actually ever happen?
I mean, probably, but I think it has to take the right environment. I'm of the mind that, generally speaking, private sector unions should be left alone. I mean, one thing to talk about right to work or things like that, and there are definitely reforms to be made. But private sector unions are not, the big bad that they used to be. They're really a small percentage of the economy now compared to what they used to be back in the day. But public sector unions, I'm not inclined to think that they should exist. The idea that we're going to have government employees band together to bargain against the interest of the taxpayers, which is effectively the only purpose of most public sector unions. To me, that's just inappropriate. We can have plenty of protections to make sure that, workers aren't being frivolously fired, that they got good working conditions, all the things that ostensibly unions are supposed to be sticking up for their people for. And really that's what our legislature should be doing. We should be sticking up for government workers, if they're treated poorly through our statutes and regulations. But absolutely not should they, be able to go on strike or demand higher wages outside of a market rate or any other number of things, when you're literally living off of the backs of the taxpayers. That's just not appropriate. Do I think there's a huge will to change that? No, I think that's kind of one of those things that it'll require the right environment, the right circumstance, and honestly, the right union to just go too far at the wrong time and, whether it be, a strike at an inopportune moment or something that just the general public thinks, okay, that's just a bridge too far for me. And that might ignite some interest in making some changes. In the meantime, though, I think that's an area that probably doesn't get a lot of attention.
So basically something like Minnesota did, which I don't know if that actually passed, but I know there was a proposal in one teachers union in Minnesota where there was an initial agreement that if there were any layoffs, that the first ones that would go were white teachers. The minority teachers would be the last to be laid off. Something like that might spark somebody saying, whoa, wait a minute. And we have friends in Minnesota, and I sent her just the headline of the article, and her reaction is just what I expected. She hadn't heard that, and I believe it was probably the Minneapolis-St. Paul area was where that happened, but she was like, she was fuming. She said, I didn't even know about this. I said, well, now you do. Ta-da. Why don't you get out of Minnesota? And they bought a house, so now they're not leaving Minnesota. Crazy, crazy folks.
Nice.
I'm trying to think of any other topics. I know you got to run here pretty soon, Tony. Anything else that you would like to see getting worked on this? Not particularly the special session, but the coming legislative session. Anything else that you would like to see done here in the state of Missouri?
One of my pet peeves that I'm going to keep chipping away on, and it's been a difficulty for me. I actually had a bill that died on the floor of the House to deal with this issue, but I'm not giving up. And that's the idea of governments, especially local governments, spending taxpayer money to advocate for issues on the ballot. Missouri's got the statute that says that you can't use tax dollars to tell people to vote for or against anything, right? And so how all of these little political subdivisions get around that is they spend tax dollars to, quote, educate voters. And they don't actually tell them how to vote, but they pretty well tell them how to vote just without saying vote yes or vote no, right? To the point where I literally went to a city hall in St. Charles County. It's outside of my district, but it is not super far from where I live. I went to the city hall for a meeting, and I walk in the lobby, and they have a stack of Frisbees. And the Frisbees have printed on it, support your local parks, vote on Prop P. Well, they don't tell you to vote yes. And, the tax increase on Prop P would support the local props or local park. So it is factually accurate, right? But I think everyone pretty well can gather how they would like you to vote from the fact that they're handing out a Frisbee, for a tax increase about parks. And to me, that just completely gets me seeing red. The idea that they spend tens of thousands of dollars in most elections giving propaganda to people to tell them to raise their taxes or to pass a certain measure, that is insane. I had a bill to put a stop to it. Unfortunately, like I said, it did end up dying on the floor, so I'm going to have to refactor that to maybe tone it back a little bit. Maybe have some exceptions or something. I don't know. But we got to do something because it's amazing how much money and time goes into propagandizing people, whether it be to raise your taxes or to pass a bond issue or any of these things. That is not, by any means, fair and balanced. It is very much a leading with a conclusion to it that is well beyond just an educational front. And that's, all your taxpayer dollars that are being spent for that. And any efforts to oppose these issues, it's going to be a volunteer effort. People that have to raise money, go door to door. And it's a Herculean effort from those citizens to fight back against literally City Hall and their tens of thousands of dollars. So I think that's absolutely something we need to look at.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, let's face it, like we were talking about earlier, every time you turn around, the government's wanting a tax increase on this or tax increase on that, parks, schools, fire department, the ambulance, police departments, whatever. You need a tax increase for this, tax increase for that. And yeah, well, if that's the inherent action of government, then your taxpayer money is being spent all the time in order to quote unquote educate you. All right, one last question, Tony, before I let you go. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but where do you stand on the transgender females competing in female sports in schools?
I got to tell you, that whole issue drives me nuts. It's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, just because everyone gets so worked up on it on both sides, and they just kind of miss the forest for the trees in a lot of respects. No, I don't think that we should have kids competing in sports against people that are blatantly unable to be competitive because of gender imbalances, because of whether it be surgery or hormones or whatever. However, the reality is, if there's something to get up in arms at about the public school system, and as messed up as it is, I got to tell you, I got a long, long list of things that we can talk about and really get our power behind fixing long before we get to the transgender sports issue. I mean, the reality is there's just not that many kids that are transgender in Missouri schools. And it is luckily, very much of a fringe issue. And while I'm inclined to keep it that way, I wish we could take the enthusiasm and the fervor behind that issue and focus it on something like giving parents an actual choice of where to send their kids, or lowering taxes that go to pay for these schools and prop up the liberal administrators that are instituting these policies to begin with. If we got so excited about those issues, I think we'd be having a different conversation. But the reality is, I think people sometimes like to chase shiny objects, as they say, and the national media does kind of push those narratives, and sometimes the legislature just kind of has to chase those down because that's what everyone's talking about, and that's what our constituents are demanding of us. But I got to say, I really hope that people start really looking at reforming schools in a bigger way, and not just these kind of more obscure issues, at least in Missouri. If I lived in New York, California, I'd probably feel like there were much more important issues. But, luckily in Missouri, it's not really a big thing just yet.
Yeah, and you're right. It is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that that's even going on, and it's unfortunate that you can get – but it's one of those divisive issues, People get passionate on both sides and continue butting heads, and then, we don't notice that the state of Missouri's budget grew by, 12 point something $billion. No people didn't pay attention to that, but they know that there might be a few transgender girls, participating in female sports, and everybody knows about that, but nobody knows that the size of government's budget in Missouri grew by $12 billion. So, I understand, and I'm with you. All right, Tony. Well, I greatly appreciate your time this evening, and I'll just say this to you. During the legislative session, if you get some bills that you want to try to get through and you want to raise public awareness on them, maybe get some phone calls and some emails started to the state reps, let me know. I'll have you back on and we can discuss those bills and educate everybody on them, so nobody can say they were unaware of the situation.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, Tony, well, you have a great weekend, sir. Again, I appreciate your time, and best of luck to you.
Thanks very much, John.
All right,
take
care.
Later.
All right, folks, that was Tony Lovasco. Super excited to have him on because, Tony's one of the good guys up there in Jefferson City, and I think we can all appreciate his efforts. Now, Catherine? Okay, Catherine, I'm going to tell you something that I heard when I was up at the Capitol on Wednesday, okay? And I just want you to know I was talking to a state rep that I've interviewed on the show before. I ran into her at the cafeteria on Wednesday and got to sit down and talk to her for about 15, 20 minutes. And, again, lively conversation. She's so awesome. She didn't know who you were, but she said, "Oh, the Libertarian candidate running against Fitzwater." I said, "Yes, that's right." And she goes, "Yeah, there's a lot of people not happy with him." So even though she didn't know your name, she knew exactly who you were. She knew exactly the situation. And she understands that a lot of people are not happy with Fitzwater. So, keep your chin up, because I was like, ooh, that's good news. That's good news. I like to hear that. But I will call you right after the show, Catherine. Not a problem. Gary, yeah, that was I'm not on top of my game tonight. I fell asleep on the couch and ate some food, and I come up here and I'm like, ugh, kind of brain dead. But yeah, again, Tony's one of the good guys, and to those of you who made it to the Capitol on Wednesday, it was great seeing you. Gary, I know you were there. It was really great seeing everybody. Grant was there. Let's see. It was Grant, Gary, and Alan. I can't remember who came with Patrick. Let's see. So there was Grant and Gary and Casey, Rich, and Alan. Man, why am I blanking? Oh, I think it goes by Rusty Shackelford. I can't remember his name either. Another gentleman by the name of John was there. Grant was there. My wife was along. Why? Yep, drawing a blank. Sorry, folks. But it was great to see you. Kevin Hurdle was there. Yeah, okay. Blanking out, guys. I'm going into work tomorrow. I must be a fool. So anyways, great seeing you all in the live stream tonight. And to those of you who do not normally watch the live stream on Saturday night, I implore you to check out Missouri Freedom Initiative on YouTube. Saturday night starting at 7:30. Come to YouTube, join the live stream, join the chat, listen. You'll get good updates on what the plans are, what things are going on, what are the hot things going on in the state of Missouri. Please be sure to check that out. I know a lot of you in here right now do, but to those of you who listen to the podcast or in the radio, make sure you join the Missouri Freedom Initiative on Saturday nights at 7:30. Also, don't forget to check out MOLibertyRadio.us. Especially on Sunday nights at 7 p.m. with Sam and Trish Britton off the cuff radio. Again, it was great to see you guys. Thanks to all of you who watched the live stream. Thanks to all of you who listen to the podcast, who listen on the radio. Subscription numbers keep going up. The views keep going up. The guests are going to continue to get just a little bit bigger and a little bit better. And I don't mean that in a negative way about someone else, anybody that's been on here. But I'm working actively to get Michael Bolden on. I got Daniel Miller on next week. Also, I'm going to get in touch with the senator from my district, Ben Brown, and try to get him on with me on the 30th of the month. And then next month, the first weekend will be Patrick. And then I'm going to work on getting some of the candidates that have been on with me before on one more time before the elections in November. So stay tuned for that. I got a lot of good guests coming up, hopefully for several weeks in a row, and a lot of good discussion, a lot of good topics, and a lot of fun. So to those of you out there who continue to support me, again, thanks so much, and we'll see you all next week right here on the Missouri Liberty Report with Daniel Miller. Take care, everybody. All right, guys, I appreciate you joining in with me tonight and all the comments and the questions and everything. And Catherine, as soon as I get done here, I will call you and talk to you a little bit. But thanks, guys. I really appreciate all you showing up and joining in with me. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Daniel's another one I can't wait to have on and talk to about the whole national divorce issue. But yeah. And I know Liberty Revolutionary, I know you tried to get me and Michael Bolden together. I still haven't heard anything from him, so I'm going to keep DMing him and all that jazz. Well, Catherine, I'm going to call you anyway because you already told me to, and now you can't change your mind. Well, I'll try to keep it short. I know I talk a lot, but I'll try to keep it short. But I'm gonna keep working on Michael Bolden. I'm gonna work on getting Eric Peters on here, some other interesting guests. I'm just gonna keep plugging away. Eventually, I'll get one of them or both of them on here. They'd be great, great interviews. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. Oh, he did reply to you? Okay, he hasn't replied to me yet. So I will continue to poke and prod politely, not get rude and stalker like. I don't want to be a stalker. I just want to do an interview. So anyway, thanks everybody. Again, great seeing you all here. And I should be on tomorrow. Oh, also tomorrow starting at 2:00, look up Constitutional Grassroots Movement. Our friend Jesse Rude will be doing Constitution Day, a live stream, and it's going to start at 2, and it's probably going to go up until right around the time that Patrick starts his live stream. I think Patrick's going to be on with him at 5:00. So look up Constitutional Grassroots Movement on YouTube tomorrow starting at 2. He's going to have some good guests on and talk about all things Constitution. So also make sure you look for that. And Catherine, I will call you here in just a minute. Good night, everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy hopefully you got 2 days off. Enjoy that. Go back to the old grindstone on Monday. And again, hopefully I will be joining in on Patrick's live stream tomorrow night. But if I don't see you there, I'll see you next Friday right here